cut out from the big German chart. On the midship thwart, between us, lay the compass and a watch. Between these three objects, compass, watch, and chart, his eyes darted constantly, never looking up or out, save occasionally for a sharp glance over the side at the flying bubbles, to see if I was sustaining a regular speed. My duty was to be his automaton, the human equivalent of a marine engine whose revolutions can be counted and used as data by the navigator. My arms must be regular as twin pistons, the energy that drove them as controllable as steam. It was a hard ideal to reach, for the complex mortal tends to rely on all the senses God has given him, so unfitting himself for mechanical exactitude when a sense, eyesight in my case, fails him. At first it was constantly left or right from Davies, accompanied by a bubbling from the rudder. "This won't do, too much helm," said Davies, without looking up. "Keep your stroke, but listen to me. Can you see the compass card?" "When I come forward." "Take your time and don't go flurried, but each time you come forward have a good look at it. The course is sou'west, half west. You take the opposite, northeast, half east, and keep her stern on that. It'll be rough, but it'll save some helm and give me a hand free if I want it." I did as he said, not without effort, and our progress gradually became smoother, till we had no need to speak at all. The only sound now was one like the gentle simmer of a saucepan away to port. The lisp of surf I knew it to be, and the muffled grunt of the rowlocks. I broke the silence once to say, "It's very shallow." I had touched sand with my right scull. "Don't talk," said Davies. About half an hour passed, and then he added sounding to his other occupations. Plump went the lead at regular intervals, and he steered with his hip while pulling in the line. Very little of it went out at first, then less still. Again I struck bottom, and, glancing aside, saw weeds. Suddenly he got a deep cast, and the dinghy, freed from the slight drag which shallow water always inflicts on a small boat, leapt buoyantly forward. At the same time I knew by boils on the smooth surface that we were in a strong tideway. "The Buse-Tief," muttered Davies. "Row hard now, and steady as a clock." For 100 yards or more I bent to my sculls and made her fly. Davies was getting 6-fathom casts, till just as suddenly as it had deepened the water shoaled. 10 feet, 6, 3, 1, the dinghy grounded. "Good," said Davies. "Back her off. Pull your right only." The dinghy spun round with her bow to north-northwest. "Both arms together. Don't you worry about the compass now, just pull and listen for orders. There's a tricky bit coming." He put aside the chart, kicked the lead under the seat, and, kneeling on the dripping coils of line, sounded continuously with the butt end of the boat-hook, a stumpy little implement, notched at intervals of a foot, and often before used for the same purpose. All at once I was aware that a check had come, for the dinghy swerved and doubled like a hound ranging after scent. "Stop her," he said suddenly, "and throw out the grapnel." I obeyed and we brought up, swinging, to a slight current, whose direction Davies verified by the compass. Then for half a minute he gave himself up to concentrated thought. What struck me most about him was that he never for a moment strained his eyes through the fog, a useless exercise, for 5 yards or so was the radius of our vision, which, however, I could not help indulging in while I rested. He made up his mind, and we were off again, straight and swift as an arrow this time, and in water deeper than the boat-hook. I could see by his face that he was taking some bold expedient whose issue hung in the balance. Again we touched mud, and the artist's joy of achievement shone in his eyes. Backing away, we headed west, and for the first time he began to gaze into the fog. "There's one," he snapped at last. Easy all! A boom, one of the usual upright saplings, glided out of the mist. He caught hold of it, and we brought up. "Rest for 3 minutes now," he said. "We're in fairly good time." It was 11:10. I ate some biscuits and took a nip of whisky, while Davies prepared for the next stage. We had reached the eastern outlet of Memmert Balje, the channel which runs east and west behind Juist Island, direct to the south point of Memmert. How we had reached it was incomprehensible to me at the time, but the reader will understand by comparing my narrative with the dotted line on the chart. I add this brief explanation, that Davies's method had been to cross the channel called the Buse Tief, and strike the other side of it at a point well south of the outlet of Memmert Balje, in view of the northward set of the ebb tide, and then to drop back north and feel his way to the outlet. The check was caused by a deep indentation in the Itzendorf Flat, a cul-de-sac with a wide mouth, which Davies was very near mistaking for the Balje itself. We had no time to skirt dents so deep as that, hence the dash across its mouth with the chance of missing the upper lip altogether, and of either being carried out to sea, for the slightest error was cumulative, or straying fruitlessly along the edge. The next 3 miles were the most critical of all. They included the watershed, whose length and depth were doubtful; they included, too, the crux of the whole passage, a spot where the channel forks, our own branch continuing west, and another branch diverging from it northwestward. We must row against time, and yet we must negotiate that crux. Add to this that the current was against us till the watershed was crossed, that the tide was just at its most baffling stage, too low to allow us to risk short cuts, and too high to give definition to the banks of the channel, and that the compass was no aid whatever for the minor bends. "Time's up," said Davies, and on we went. I was hugging the comfortable thought that we should now have booms on our starboard for the whole distance. On our starboard, I say, for experience had taught us that all channels running parallel with the coast and islands were uniformly boomed on the northern side. Anyone less confident than Davies would have succumbed to the temptation of slavishly relying on these marks, creeping from one to the other, and wasting precious time; but Davies knew our friend the boom and his eccentricities too well, and preferred to trust to his sense of touch, which no fog in the world could impair. If we happened to sight one, well and good, we should know which side of the channel we were on; but even this contingent advantage he deliberately sacrificed after a short distance, for he crossed over to the south or unboomed side and steered and sounded along it, using the Itzendorf Flat as his handrail, so to speak. He was compelled to do this, he told me afterwards, in view of the crux, where the converging lines of booms would have involved us in irremediable confusion. Our branch was the southern one, and it followed that we must use the southern bank, and defer obtaining any help from booms until sure we were past that critical spot. For an hour we were at the extreme strain, I of physical exertion, he of mental. I could not get into a steady swing, for little checks were constant. My right scull was forever skidding on mud or weeds, and the backward suck of shoal water clogged our progress. Once we were both of us out in the slime tugging at the dinghy's sides, then in again blundering on. I found the fog bemusing, lost all idea of time and space, and felt like a senseless marionette kicking and jerking to a mad music without tune or time. The misty form of Davies, as he sat with his right arm swinging rhythmically forward and back, was a clockwork figure as mad as myself, but didactic and gibbering in its madness. Then the boat-hook he wielded with a circular sweep began to take grotesque shapes in my heated fancy; now it was the antenna of a groping insect, now the crank of a cripple's self-propelled perambulator, now the alpenstock of a lunatic mountaineer who sits in his chair and climbs to some phantom watershed. at the back of such mire.